Good morning, Warren, and welcome to the Low Carb Paleo Show.
Good morning to you, Alan, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. Good morning, Mark. How are you doing in Spain?
Wonderful, thank you, Alan. Can't complain at all. And the weather's fine too, so what more could one ask for?
Can't complain. What's your usual reply? Can't complain, but if I did...
No one would listen anyway.
Okay.
Is that a typical British response or something? Complain?
It could be, Warren, it could be. I don't know. I guess as I'm British, I can own it. Why not?
Step up or lift, right?
Yes.
It's a very realistic answer. Most people don't care. Okay, so Warren, you and I met on LinkedIn. You approached me and you wanted to tell us about your book, and here you are. Thank you for being on our show. And so by trade, you are, and let me make sure I pronounce this right, acupuncturist?
Correct.
Those fancy words, it's hard for me to pronounce. So acupuncturist and author of two books, Your Mitochondria, Key to Health and Longevity. And the first one was Reality We Create, which we will not talk about today. So regarding your background, can you give us a short version of your background, how you get where you are now?
Well, I mean, what got me interested in it? I mean, I was primarily a psychotherapist before that, before acupuncture, but then I would get headaches occasionally. And so I tried conventional medicine, and that didn't work. And I tried an old acupuncturist down the street from me, and my headache went away for like 6 months. And so that really got me interested. And so I did a 5-year training program in acupuncture to become licensed in that. And that's how I got into acupuncture.
Is that a combined Chinese medicine and acupuncture, or just straight up acupuncture?
No, it's both Chinese medicine and acupuncturist.
We have a school like that in Austin.
Yeah, no, you have 2 of them, in fact.
Two of them. Mm-hmm. Well, I've done something new. I knew of only one.
Yeah.
How did you come about to write your books?
Well, so here in the clinic, we have 6 other acupuncturists that practice here, and our focus has been on fertility and infertility. And what we begin to notice that we would stabilize a woman's cycle. She would start feeling a lot better. She would make an attempt to get pregnant, and the pregnancy would fail within the first 3 months. And that's kind of a typical observation. So at that level, I started looking at what may be responsible for causing that, and I came onto the mitochondria, and it turns out like a female egg has like 100,000 mitochondria in it. Mm-hmm. And if you think, like a normal skin cell, for example, would have like 100 mitochondria in it. Mm-hmm. So we have this huge egg, and if you think about it, within the first 3 months of life, once conception occurs, there's this tremendous growth that occurs from a single cell organism to a multi-cell organism. And it is the mitochondria that drive that provide the energy for all of that growth to occur. And conversely, if the mitochondria are damaged or there's insufficient energy, then what happens is you have failure of conception that occurs. So once I started looking at that, I changed up our protocol to address, and started providing some nutrients and some more herbs that were specific to the mitochondria.
Okay, so maybe we should step back a little bit. Can you tell us what is the mitochondria? Because for most people, that's a very mysterious word.
Yeah. So the mitochondria, they're referred to as organelles within the cell, and they reside within each of the cells of our cells, and they produce ATP, which is adrenosone triphosphate. And that is the energy currency of the body. So, I mean, the exploration in this book was that most people kind of think that they're, they think of the food that they're eating, goes down into the, intestines, broken down into nutrients, and that supplies the body. Well, it's really much more complex than that. So all of our cells have mitochondria and they're producing energy. Without the mitochondria, we wouldn't be here. And so they're a fundamental substrate of, what's going on. And I'll just say one other thing about this. I mean, evolutionary wise, it's been like, millions of years ago, all that was on the planet was these single cell organisms. And they were limited about how big they could grow because of gravity. If they got too big, gravity would crush them. So something really unusual happened at one time, and that was one organism was engulfing another organism to eat it, to digest it, and there was a deal made. And the deal was, hey, look, don't eat me. I'll reside inside of you and make all the energy for your body, and you provide me the nutrients. And that fundamental statement, that fundamental evolutionary stage allowed what we call specialization to occur. So like specialization is our heart, our bones. I mean, like at the cellular level, there's all these structures within the cell that support the cell, that allow it to, there's cytoplasma, which, recycles components. All of that occurred because of that fundamental evolutionary step of incorporating a mitochondria for the internal energy production into the cell.
Okay, so I guess the next step would be how to keep the mitochondria healthy. What would clog it up, so to speak, to not function properly?
Well, let me back up just a second and give you the scope of what we're looking at. So, like, for example, like I mentioned, our skin cell may have like 100 mitochondria in it. And so, like, mitochondria production will drive, wrinkling of the skin. If, mitochondria aren't nourished, then you'll see accelerated aging occurring because, they're not producing energy to nourish itself. But on the larger scope, what we have to look at is like a heart cell, which is called a cardiomyocyte. Cardiomyocyte will have anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 mitochondria in the cell, constantly producing ATP to drive the expansion and the contraction of the heart, right? So, those places where there's disease categories that, what we would call age-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, neurodegeneration, arthritis, all those things are fundamentally driven by the mitochondria. So another place to think about is like what's happening in our brain. There's all of these neurons firing, and every firing that occurs in the brain requires a unit of ATP to drive it. So, all the nerve endings, that are all that energy flowing down there is driven by ATP. So, things like neurodegeneration becomes a fundamental player here with the mitochondria. So, to your question, what's important here? The important thing is so right now you and I are sitting at our desk, right? And one of the first things that occurs is low oxygen content. That mitochondria are just like little engines, and they require oxygen. And so when you and I are sitting here, what's happening is there's kind of what's a shallow breathing occurring. And, it's not a full breath. And so over time, that drives hypoxia, low oxygen content. And so, sitting all day is one of the great issues coming on with people's health now. Mm-hmm. So number one would be oxygen. It really requires oxygen. So for myself, about every 15 minutes, I'll go take a walk around the clinic, visit some of the practitioners, see what's going on. And then I do quite a bit of exercise, outside of the clinic. The other issue here, so number one would be oxygen. Number two would be like mild exercise. Notice I qualified that as mild. So mild exercise would be, walking, biking, anything like that. I mean, if you're doing rigorous exercise, that's okay, right? I'm not saying not do that, but the mild exercise drives biogenesis, which is creation of new mitochondria. And it also, like if you've been kind of sedentary for a while, it kind of clears out the internal pathways in the mitochondria for the production of ATP. The next one is like, it's what's really important is the mitochondria really need, so there's two sources of energy, right? One is energy derived from sugars. Mm-hmm. For the mitochondria. And the second one is energy derived from fats. So, we've talked about that for the mitochondria, ATP is the energy product of the mitochondria. And, right. And so for every unit of sugar you ingest, you're going to get 2 units of ATP out, right? Okay. For every unit of fats that you ingest, you're going to get like 32 units of ATP out. So, as a chef, I mean, what does that say about your eating, right? I mean, about, the approach to eating there.
Well, actually, I don't follow the keto diet, which is mostly fat.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
But I do follow the paleo diet, and being French and a nutritionist, I tend to focus only on healthy fats. Yeah. And my salad dressing uses only organic virgin olive oil. My for cooking, I use only coconut oil. I do take in, as in medication, so to speak, I do take in a tablespoon of coconut oil in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I would put a pat of grass-fed butter in my hot chocolate in the morning as well. Yeah. And I'm not afraid of fat because I'm French, but I also don't push it to the keto level. Mm-hmm. I like to keep my diet balanced, variety, freshness, and all that. So going back to your question, so what you're basically confirming is that, at least for some people, the keto diet would be a good choice for mitochondria's health. Right. But they need to also add the other elements, the exercise. And,
right. So I mean, from my point of view, good quality fats are like, good quality butter, good quality, I mean, a red meat can be okay. The fats in the meat, the fats in the chicken are okay. It's just the quality issue here that, and you're going to get much more energy production, ATP production from the good quality fats as opposed to the carbohydrates and the sugars. It's just right. And the thing that, I discuss in there is that the carbohydrates and the sugars, they drive a process called reactive oxygen species, which are, they're kind of like radicalized, they're kind of like radioactive material. And they have the ability to punch holes in the membrane of both the cells and the mitochondria because they're so charged. And so, you can imagine that sets up an inflammatory response, that's going to drive the aging process even more, accelerate the aging process.
Right. So speaking of which, again, we need to repeat the fact that there's fats and fats. There's good fats and bad fats.
That's right.
Personally, I tend to focus on omega-3 fatty acids.
Right.
which are, you know, my understanding, and I'm not an expert in mitochondria, but the cell walls are porous, and omega-6 fatty acid tend to either block them or create inflammation. Can you talk to us about this?
Yeah, I mean, so here, you know, where we're working right now in this discussion is at it is a molecular level, right? At the level of the cell. And it's totally amazing what's happening at that level. I mean, so your comment is like, you know, it's these openings. Well, these openings actually are in the cell. They're all over the cell surface, and they're like little doors that open up and shut, and this opening and shutting is driven by the mitochondria, the action of the mitochondria. And so they can selectively let waste products out of the cell, and they can selectively let, you know, nutrients into the cell. And, you know, at that level it becomes really quite amazing, like, you know, all these processes that's going on in the cell.
Yeah, the body is an amazing. Amazing is a limited word to describe how impressive the body is designed and how it operates.
Really.
Okay, so we were talking about fats and how the quality of the fat influences the health of the mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
Is it also true that saturated fat of bad quality, for example, Crisco, hydrogen fats, and so on, would tend to clog up the cell and the
membranes? They would
yes.
tend to damage the membranes.
Yes.
Yep. So there's a couple of things here. So the fats are a good thing, but the other thing that's important, again, from your perspective, is fiber. So let me lay out the framework here, what we're looking at. So like in the large intestines, there's a whole, what we call a microbiome, a whole bacteria content. And that environment there is anaerobic, means the bacteria don't use oxygen. But the interesting thing is they take all of this, you know, fiber that can't be digested, and they ferment it, and they make what's called a short chain fatty acid, or butyrate. Now, the mitochondria and the colonocytes, so remember previously I mentioned the heart cells, how many mitochondria in there? Well, the colonocytes, which are the colon cells, also have mitochondria in there producing, you know, energy. And those guys love, you know, the butyrate and the short chain fatty acids, you know, as an energy source. Now, the issue, which I think, you know, you can comment on here, is our intake of fiber has been substantially reduced from where it was like 100 years ago.
Right.
And it has a profound influence on the disease process. And
how so?
Well, I mean, the short chain fatty acids, I mean, like they're beneficial for diabetes, they're beneficial for cardiovascular issues and neurodegeneration. You know, they improve those things. I mean, because the mitochondria in the colon use them, but then they're just kind of used all over the body. They're just so fundamental to, stopping inflammation. So what we're looking at here is an inflammatory process that's been accelerated. And, the acceleration is in large part, due to food, the food that we eat.
So is short-chain fatty acid only created in the colon through fibers, or is it possible to ingest short-chain fatty acid?
There's definitely supplements out there like fructooligosaccharides, which are short-chain fatty acids, and they're fiber, but then they're broken down into fermented in the large intestines, and then they produce the short-chain fatty acids from it. You're not going to find a supplement with short-chain fatty acids by itself.
Okay, so then what is your recommendation? Of course, there's the usual 8 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Any particular fruits and vegetables, or do you have favorites, for example?
Well, I mean, the things that have they create a lot of short chain fatty acids are like radishes or Jerusalem artichokes, or artichokes or bananas or things like that. Those are excellent, and carrots. I mean, those are excellent sources. But for the people that we see here in the clinic, I mean, there's a transition period. I mean, a lot of people, they come in and they think they're eating really clean, but I mean, it's just far from it. And, their
Right.
consumption of fibers are just, minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, the thinking here is you just have to understand. I mean, if you're cleaning up your diet, what you're thinking, that you're only shopping in the perimeter of your grocery store. You're not going into those interior aisles, because that's where all the processed foods are. And
Yes.
so it kind of, kind of makes it a lot easier to shop.
Right. So I'm good on the radishes and the bananas. I'm short on the Jerusalem artichoke. I'm good on the carrots.
Yep.
And I make sure I always have salad every single day.
Yep.
Typically mixed greens, and I would add broccoli and radishes and nuts to it, and so on.
Yep.
So that would be, for example, a one example of good kind of fiber, right?
Yep. That's going to produce those beneficial bacteria in the large intestines, which are going to produce the short chain fatty acids.
Now, on this particular subject, does soluble fiber versus insoluble fiber have any different effect?
Well, a soluble fiber like a carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't have a beneficial effect.
Okay.
I mean, you're looking for, the consumption of fiber, insoluble fiber, is so low, and the issue is that's how the fermentation process occurs in the large intestines with the insoluble fiber.
Right. So for the listeners out there, only the kind of fibers you chew on, not the kind you swallow. If you don't have to chew it, then it's not the right kind of fiber.
Yeah, there goes that soft bread and all that stuff.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and all these liquid sugar drinks kind of things, and kind of processed grains, and which brings us back to the diet issue. Do you recommend a particular diet for mitochondria health, or what's your recommendation on that?
So like we see a lot of patients that are in different degrees, and what I want to do is try to make it easy, for people to make transitions. And so, we just try to lay out the overall approach here, and, really stress to them how important it is to get the fibers in. And, and then we try to give them a little bit of education about what's going on in the food industry in the context of, the cattle and all that stuff. I mean, they're because of the way that they're, marketed. I mean, there's a lot of antibiotic use going into the cattle, the chicken, the pork, and all of that has a detrimental effect on what's happening in the gut, and then in turn the mitochondria.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, we're fully aware of the issue. We've talked to farmers and ranchers, and I'm absolutely against using corn, soy, and alfalfa genetically engineered, because the GMO ready crops are actually antibiotics. They actually kill the beneficial bacteria in the gut. So we have a double whammy effect. You're getting the wrong kind of fat from the wrong kind of ingredient, like soy and corn, but you also get the genetically engineered part, which is designed to kill bacteria in the ground and on the bugs and so on and so forth. So it gets into our gut and it damages our flora, internal flora, and affects how we digest the food, including the fibers and so on and so forth. So there's a chain effect that's extremely important that we are trying to repeat over and over again in this show, that we need people to understand that it's not just the type of food you eat, it's the quality of the food that's very important.
Right.
A previous guest 2 days ago made a good comment about this. She said it's not just the food you eat, it's the food that your food eats that's important.
The food that your food the food that your bacteria eats is important. Is that what she means by that?
No, she was referring to the food that the cows is eating, the pig is eating, the chicken is eating is important as well. It's not just, you don't just buy beef, just beef. You choose to buy beef from industrial production, or you buy beef grass-fed that feeds on grass,
right,
which is their natural food, not on industrial food like we mentioned before, corn and soy.
Well, so like it's really, I'm actually writing my third book now about the microbiome, but what you're referring to is it's the plant shikimate pathway, and the plant shikimate pathway. So we're talking about neurodegeneration now, Parkinson's, things like that. Which I've already given you the reference for the mitochondria, but the neurotransmitters like the serotonin, the dopamine, the norepinephrine, all that stuff, our body doesn't make those on its own. It comes from the plants, and it's the shikimate pathway which makes those enzymes, which then come in and interact with the bacteria in the gut. So when you're talking about Roundup and GMO and all of that, basically breaks that pathway, and so then we begin to see a rising occurrence, like with kids, is ADD, attention deficit disorder, or it's like depression or anxiety with adults, and that's all driven as a gut-related issue. Now, which is totally different than what the pharmaceutical industry is telling us.
Yes. Would you include autism as part of this spectrum?
Yep, I would.
So without stretching? Generally,
we see that coupled with antibiotics. So with autism, here's what we see. We see that there's a cesarean birth.
Yes.
Right, and so there's a cesarean birth. And then from there, we see rounds of antibiotics due to ear infections or things like that. So all of that ends up profoundly affecting the microbiome.
What we should explain when we mention cesarean is that the fact that through natural birth, when the baby goes through the birth canal, the mother is actually seeding the baby with beneficial bacteria, which would help protect the baby against infections. Right. Then the doctors typically make it worse by constantly bombarding this kid with antibiotics, would further damage the friendly bacteria. And so it's a cycle that keeps on repeating itself.
Right, and they can see, like the kids that are cesarean birth, generally when they looked at longitudinal studies, like in England and places like that, they'll see that those kids are generally obese.
Right. So another important factor I forgot to mention is breastfeeding.
Yep.
Through the breast milk, the mother is actually also seeding friendly bacteria into the kid's body. And what the scandal is, in my opinion, is that they are now forcing these multiple vaccines on kids that don't have an immune system built up already.
Right. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen until 6 months of age.
Right, at least, and then look how they do it. They start extremely early on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in some cases, just a few days after birth. And not only that, but they went from like 6 to 8 when I was a kid, now to what, 30 different vaccines now in a period of what? You probably know better than me. I'm not a doctor, so.
I don't have that number, but I mean, you have to be,
It's
a
too
parent
many,
has to be
whatever.
really diligent for their kid. So I want to share one other thing here, so you get the full implication. So you remember early on in the discussion, I said that the mitochondria, like the female egg has 100,000 mitochondria in it, right?
Right.
And so here's something totally interesting, that egg, as soon as there's conception occurs with the sperm cell, the mitochondria in that egg kill off all the male mitochondria. So yeah, so so
it starts early.
yeah, and so like genetically, I mean, there's kind of like a mitochondria Eve. It gets past. I mean, the female, you could back us up to a mitochondria Eve, because whether you're male or female, you have your mother's mitochondria in there, right?
Oh, really?
So here's the next thing. So you mentioned birth, right? So the way a birth happens, it's, the kid is head down, face towards the butt in the birth process. And so what happens is kind of like a tube of toothpaste. The kid gets a heavy dose of vaginal bacteria and a heavy dose of rectal bacteria. And that's how they populate themselves. I mean, they're streamed. So let's compare that to a cesarean operation. What happens is, they're getting exposed to the environment around them, the doctors around them, the bacteria, and the skin of the mother, which is totally different than what they would normally be exposed to. So, the female really reigns supreme here. At that level. I mean,
I mean, for the sake of expediency, it's a shame that it's coming back, and I'm glad that it does come back. But for a while during the 70s on, it was more efficient and more profitable to do cesarean than to wait hours for the baby to come around, right?
The natural time, the natural cycle.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, we go back to the same old issue that Mark and I are hopping on, as a Western medicine is all about profits versus the care of the people on, in this case, the mother and the baby. But I'm glad this is reversing.
I try to make it, at one level I agree with you, but at the other level, I mean, like, it's kind of, I mean, Western medicine has become so focused on, like, finding a cure, like, for cancer or things like that. And it's like that they miss the forest.
Yeah.
They miss the effects of the mitochondria on our health, or they miss the effects of the microbiome on our health. And it's just within the last 10 years, that there's been a big emphasis on both mitochondria and microbiome research, and really beginning to understand it, how it affects our health.
Yes. What was Mark? What was the name of this lady doctor that wrote a book on mitochondria and?
On which? Terry.
Walls.
Terry.
Yes.
Yep. I know her. She gave me a introduction. I mean, authors, and she's got an amazing story.
She has.
Heard herself.
We've had her on the show 2 times already. So, it was very instructive how she corrected her MS through diet, through basically a modified paleo diet.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we tend to focus on the effect of food on health, and that tends to be what we are interested in. Moving along, as working in the Chinese medicine field, are there other modalities that you use to help your patients?
No, I mean, like Chinese medicine, the way it traditionally was done was like diet was a component. For instance, back then, if you're eating hot, greasy foods, I mean, there'd be dietary recommendations. If you're eating excessive cold foods, there would be, like during this winter time, there'd be recommendations about eating warming foods, right? So that was a pillar. There was massage was a pillar. Chinese herbs was a pillar, and finally, the last resort was acupuncture. That's what the evolution of it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think I'm done on my side. Mark?
Yeah, I'd just like to return really to, the best sources of good quality dietary fiber. What would you recommend that people put into their diets, Warren, if they're missing stuff, or increase if they've not got enough? What are your favorite go-to foods for good fiber?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, as I said, I mean, there's about a 60% reduction in fiber intake over the last 100 years. And, food is so processed and stuff like that. So my schedule is busy. And so what I do, I try to supplement myself. I have a oleosaccharide fiber that I use. And then, generally I'm eating salads. There's the, I really like radishes and tomatoes, and those are all really great ones, and the asparagus and the broccolis and, those kind of things. I mean, that, some people shy away from. So then the question is, how do you take care of yourself if you don't like, vegetables is not your favorite source here?
Well, one issue with that, and that's why you see a lot of American kids refusing to eat vegetables, is because from very early on, if they've been raised on the formula instead of mother's milk, they're already loaded with sugar. And baby food is loaded with sugar. And so they're not used to any other flavors than any kind of sugary flavors. In France, in comparison, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but the tendency is to breastfeeding more, also to introduce baby food that is homemade and without sugar, and introduce toddlers to real food very early on, and a mixed range of real food.
Right.
But nowadays, everything's processed, everything has too much sugar in it. And now, all of a sudden, you have a kid that's hooked on sugar, which can lead to obesity and diabetes and so on and so forth. Very early on, you have childhood obesity that didn't happen in the old days, combination of bad diet, lack of exercise. When I was a kid, my mother would just tell me, get out of the house, go play. Go play, go run your bicycle, go run with your friends, go, do cowboys and Indians in the forest or whatever. But nowadays, kids are cooped up at home. They play video games all day long. They don't run, they don't bike, they don't barely, break a sweat as it is. So that has a lot of effects on one's health as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's our kids today are concerned. I mean, I have a 19-year-old, and he was breastfed for 4 years, and so we had to do my wife made an ancient grains cake for him of the shape of two breasts when we were after 4 years. We say, okay, goodbye to the mate. He called them maish, so. We had a whole ceremony for him to give up the breast. But, I mean, it's the games have a detrimental effect, and the computers have a detrimental effect on their ability to focus and, stay present. But again, back to our discussion about the shikimate pathway, the plant enzyme pathway, if they're eating crappy food, that's also affecting the neurotransmitters do what
Yeah,
you're going
because
to
typically, I mean, I see my son, and you know, he's a typical example. When they're playing video games, all they feed on is cereals and soft drinks.
I know. I got the same son. Right? It's like, buddy, you know, hit the road, get outside and do something, right?
Yeah.
Another thing I've noticed, I don't know if you guys have as well, is the fact that people have become very lazy eaters. It seems like they're not willing to chew anything or chew hard on anything. You know, so they're happy to move the jaw up and down, but actually bite into something, you know, like a raw carrot or anything that requires a bit of mastication. People just seem to shy away from that type of food. It's almost like they can't eat it quick enough, so they don't want it.
Yeah.
Well, I've noticed at least in America, compared to France, I'm not sure how it is in England, but there's this whole what has become a culture because it's been fed by marketing, but there's you know, fast food, processed food, everything is quick, quick, quick. So people, instead of chewing on their food, they swallow their food.
Yeah.
They don't take the time to masticate, to add saliva to start the digestive process. And I think that has a lot of effects on, again, you know, typically in America, you see a lot of men, the vast majority of the men past a certain age with the belly. And you know, in France, we would joke that's a beer belly, but in America, it's normal belly. Why? Because people don't masticate their food, so it drops almost not barely, you know, chewed on, and the stomach is taking on all this volume, and it takes a lot of more work to digest that food because you have to break it down. The stomach is doing all the hard work that your teeth should be doing. And I suspect that the reason for this tendency for, you know, a belly in this country is absolutely related to the lack of chewing your food. And not just in chewing your food, but also enjoying your food. Like tasting, enjoying the flavor of the food. Versus just like 1-2 bites, boom, gone. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, from my perspective, I would see like, so we talked about how the positive effects of short chain fatty acids and, you know, diabetes and obesity and things like that. I mean, fast foods, I mean, that's going to be a minimal production of short chain fatty acids, which are going to translate into fat, abdominal fat, the brown fat, and generally it will accumulate around the belly there.
Yeah.
So if they're doing what you're saying, they're not, you know, masticating their food, it's breaking down, and then they're eating, you know, heavily processed foods.
Yes.
That's, you know, then you begin to see that, because something I've always looked at myself, you know, with men, what's going on with that, you know, and it looks like they're almost bloated.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think that there's two things there, though, isn't there? It's not just the, how can I put that, the fact they're not chewing, it's also the ingredients in the food are causing inflammation of the stomach.
Right.
You know, and bloating as well, obviously. But when you're eating that level of garbage food, then it's going to cause inflammation throughout the body and all the problems associated with it. Anyway, moving on, Warren.
Yes.
A lot of the information that we've been talking about today is in one of your books, isn't it? Would you like to, if you've got one hand, if you can put it up on screen so we can see what it looks like?
Okay, you'll have to tell me if you can see it. Can you see that?
Yeah, just come back a tiddly bit.
Come back.
That's it.
And this is actually the shape of a mitochondria. That's
is it really? They are weird.
What the hell is that? You know?
Yeah, I was wondering if it was like a colon or something.
Yeah, the colon, right? No, this is what the mitochondria, and each of these are like little chambers where it's stepped up in energy where the ATP is made stronger and stronger to drive these processes.
Oh, right.
So this is the book, and you can find the book on Amazon, Your Mitochondria, or you can go to our website, my website, which is wcargal, cargal.com.
Oh,
and
that's nice and easy.
both books, I have some free downloads if you're not sure about it. You know, we have products that we could use with the mitochondria to, you know, for health issues. I mean, specifically around cardiovascular issues that people would want to consider if they already have those issues.
Super job. And if they want to get hold of you personally, you're in Atlanta, aren't you? I think you said.
Yeah, you know, you can. I'm on LinkedIn. You know,
Mm-hmm.
send me a message, or I'm on. You know, you can call the clinic, and they'll put you in touch with me, or email the clinic, and you know, look at that too. You know, I'm very interested in, you know, how people respond to these protocols. So I always like to talk and find out what's going on. You know, how you doing with this?
Okay, super job. Now we've covered a lot. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that we should have?
No, I had a great time.
Excellent.
It's fun, you know, yucking around with you guys.
Well, as you know, we don't take ourselves seriously, but the
That's
message is
good.
always the key thing.
Uh-huh.
Super job.
Yeah.
Alan, over to you.
Yeah, but don't take seriously, but when we get serious, we get serious. Thank you again, Warren, for being on the Low Carb Paleo show. And as we say in Texas, à votre santé, y'all.
I'm from Fort Worth, and we would say howdy-os or something.
Yes.
Thanks, Warren.